I agree with everything you just said, Eche. What I would say I find most remarkable is the great comfort that people find in all agreeing with each other. So I have never seen any international event so universally and so simplistically presented. You know, it's more and more the story is being told as if there's no context, no history, nothing happened before 17 days ago. Suddenly, these Russians turned up in Ukraine. Huge surprise, you know. And of course, I don't support the invasion of Ukraine at all. And I certainly don't support what's happening to the people there. But whenever I try to mention that this comes as a result of a history which we are involved in, we had a part in, quite a big part in, people say, oh, so you're a Putinist, are you? You support Putin. And this kind of them and us mentality seems to have dominated absolutely everybody, including all the liberals that I know. I had an incredible experience the other day. I was playing some unreleased songs to some friends who wanted to record one of my unreleased songs. And I played one and they said, oh, that's really great. Love that one. Can we do that? And I said, yes. And they said, what's the name? I said, St. Petersburg. That was actually the name of the song. And they said, oh, I don't think we can do that. Can we do that? You know, and I thought, what is controversial about that? And are we really in a position now where we're going to say the Russians are so evil that everything that Russians have ever done must be cast away from us as though tainted by the devil? So I've never seen anything like this before. The only thing a little bit like it was the destruction of Jeremy Corbyn. Actually, that was a rather similar operation. Again, it was black and white, you know. So that's all I want to say right now, because other people want to speak.
Well, I know the shame of being a citizen of a country run by a dictator. You know, things are done in your name and you're constantly in this, oh my God, like, you know, this really deeply shameful feeling. So I can imagine at least this 20% of the population is in that mood at the moment. So I don't feel comfortable compromising that. I'm like, and also, you know, anti-Russian. What is that? I'm like, as if Europe found its new Jews or something.
Mm. Yeah.
Mm.
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 Come on, Roger.
That was too much.
Well, of course, I agree with everything and all of that. We all do. You know, this is so distressing that I find it very difficult to kind of put my thoughts together. And so I want to concentrate my mind now onto saying what is important about this, the most fundamentally important thing about it. And of course, you're right about all the blue and yellow fills me with absolute horror, the waving of flags. We had this conversation before the show ever went out, and I'm sure it does everybody, because it's very difficult to actually concentrate your mind on the idea that what you're doing is taking the sides of innocent people against people who are not innocent, and there's a perpetrator and a victim. And that's what the context of this is, because that is not the context of this, but it is the narrative that we have been set up for over years of the recent trend in propaganda to demonize Russia, for instance, because this is relatively recent. This is, I mean, let's not forget that perestroika is only 1991. It's not that long ago. And there were, you know, meetings at the highest level. You know, Reagan and Gorbachev did sit in a room together and they did agree to ban intermediate range nuclear weapons and so on and so forth. There was a real movement towards détente and towards diplomacy being important and towards looking at the possibility of maybe building a future that we could all survive, right? And now we're looking at this, and people, by and large, and we're talking about huge majorities of people in Western countries, it seems to be, though we don't, it's very difficult to find the other side of the story of what's even going on because of the censorship of the other side of the story. It's great that we're still on, that you can still get this, and that YouTube hasn't cancelled everything yet, but they're drifting in that direction slowly but surely. The jaws of the censor are closed. Anyway, what am I trying to say? Why is this a war being encouraged to proceed by pouring money into the Ukraine, A, and B, by not engaging in diplomacy? I stumbled into a webinar like this last week. I think the people who were running it, who were lovely and very intelligent and blah, but a friend of mine was on it, Ray McGovern, ex-CIA analyst. I'm sure you all know him, or you know his work. And so I listened to them for like nearly 2 hours. And at the end of it, suddenly one of them said, "Mr. Waters, would you like to speak?" And I was a bit shocked, and I did. I fumbled my way through a few expletives, to my eternal shame. And then, but I also said, "Well, there's only about 10 of us watching this, and we need to how do we get there?" And Ray, bless him, sent me an email afterwards and said, actually, because he had done a conversation with John Mearsheimer, who we also all know, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that a lot of you out there in computer land have heard of John Mearsheimer and Ray McGovern. Well, the program that they did together has now had over 1 million views. That's a lot. That's a pretty big congregation right there. So he corrected me on that. I wrote to him yesterday and said, "Whoops, I'm sorry, that was a huge blunder on my part. And if I'm ever on that, invited to speak anywhere again ever, I will try not to make that mistake, and I'll try to cut down on the expletives a bit, because it's not a good way of selling, a different side of the narrative." Anyway, that's neither here nor there. It seems quite clear, does it not, that the reason that it's being exacerbated and allowed to go on is because the oligarchs wanted to. And as Yanis pointed out in one of his recent things that I read, oligarchs are not Russians. They're the few rich people who run everything, and they're everywhere. Mm-hmm. Certainly, they're all over the West. The West is completely controlled by corporations. And the people who invest in those corporations, by and large, oligarchs, because they've got most of the cash and whatever. They want it to keep going because it makes money. And this is really the thing that we're not looking at, is the fact that the people who are making the decision to keep the war going and to keep killing Ukrainians and Russians and all sorts of Ukrainians, some of them are the Azov battalions who, in years gone by, we would have put on a uniform maybe to go and fight them because we disagree with their politics so intensely. So it's being continued because there's money in it. I know Brian has said this often in this program. Down this pub, I've heard Brian Eno say exactly the same thing. That is why, the war industry in the United States is spread into all 52 states. Everybody has a piece of it, so that you can never attack the Pentagon budget and blah and all of that stuff. But the thing is, oh my God, what a dangerous game they're playing with. All this talk of a no-fly zone, and and you and I, we're all I'm reading everything that Yanis writes. I'm reading, if Brian would only bloody well write something, I'd read all that. But and I read everything that Ray McGovern says, and that John Mearsheimer says, and that Noam Chomsky says, and that all the wise men all over the world are saying as to how that, but they're not, and they don't give a shit. And that's the really, truly scary thing. And they don't understand, I believe, just how close to the wind, the nuclear wind, they're sailing. Because it scares the shit out of me. I really, I feel it every day now. I feel it every day. as the rhetoric builds and builds, and as more and more people divert their attention to, you know, to shining a yellow and blue light on Battersea Power Station, I go, what are you doing? Or the Empire State or whatever. You're making this into a nationalist thing, because that's what that is.
Yeah.
Of course we all disapprove of the, you know, the breaking of the UN Charter and the illegal wars, and we could go on and on and on again about Iraq, Palestine, you know, the Israeli invasion of Palestine and the 50-year oppression of the Palestinian people, and why doesn't anybody care about that? And we probably will. Well, I probably will later in this program, but I'll shut up for now.
Yanis, I wanted to give you the floor. I can ask you a question, actually, Yanis, because I want us to address this article you've written about why stop at Russian oligarchs. But in your opinion, I mean, I know it's going to be hard to keep this short, but why did this happen first? Why did Russia invaded Ukraine? And also, I mean, it'd be interesting to know your views about how we can end the war, because it's good talking about the war, but how you can end the war. And we know there are actually options on the table. And before I let you speak, there's more than 1,000 people apparently watching us live. So folks, if you want this video to be seen and viewed by as many people as possible, you know, click the like button, subscribe to all the channels, etc. And now it's you, Yanis. Thanks.
Well, thanks. Of course, the reason why we're down the pub together is because we usually happen to agree on almost everything. And this is just another occasion. But I want to take it a bit further. You see, the sea of yellow and blue covering Europe is a hypocritical sea. This is my number one accusation. In other words, what do I mean by that? That while most of the people who go out there and demonstrate are very well-meaning, if you look at it as a movement, this movement does not really have the interests of Ukrainians in their heart. As a movement, not as individuals participating in these events. What do I mean by this? Frank, you asked me, what is the only possible solution now? And there aren't many. There's only one. There are two options. One is a tragic one, a quagmire, a kind of Afghanistan, a permanent conflict, something between Afghanistan and Cyprus on the eastern flank of Europe. A slow-burning, maybe not that slow-burning, permanent conflict of a divided country with armies of occupation, with expropriation here, there, everywhere. This is, a catastrophe. It's a catastrophe for Ukraine. It's a catastrophe for our comrades in Russia who happen to be... DiEM25, Edge knows that. We have comrades, as we speak now, I'm not going to mention their names for obvious reasons, who are in prison, being tortured by Putin's henchmen for having demonstrated in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. There are particular persons that, occupy my soul and my mind almost every day because I know what they're going through. The reason why I'm saying that, the West, NATO, the powers that be, our governments, are hypocritical about the Ukrainians is because the only alternative to this quagmire is a meeting between Biden and Putin. Nothing else will sort this out, whereby there is an agreement of the two superpowers, because there are no other powers in Europe. The European Union is a figment of our imagination, doesn't exist geostrategically. It is simply the tail that the NATO wags. So imagine, the only thing that could happen is Moscow and Washington could come to an arrangement with Zelensky agreeing to it, and with the European Union playing an auxiliary role, mainly financing, that there's going to be something that Putin can proclaim to be a victory, and something that the West can proclaim the victory. A solution that leaves everybody slightly dissatisfied, but in the end spares the people of Ukraine. And what would that solution be? It's really very straightforward. Cessation of the conflict, removal of the Russian troops, an independent, neutral Ukraine along the lines of Austria. We can discuss possible association with the European Union, like Austria had one, during the Cold War. Regarding the Donbas area, you can have something like the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, which creates checks and balances, a kind of joint sovereignty, the same way that Northern Ireland enjoys joint sovereignty by London and Dublin with EU money and investment. Something like that in the Donbas area to guarantee the rights of Ukrainian speakers, Russian speakers. Crimea can be kicked into the long grass and can be put on the shelf to discuss, in 1,000 years again. That would be a solution that Putin would take to his own folks, the KGB, FSB, oligarchs, whatever, and say, look, I won. What did I want? To end the eastward expansion of NATO. I succeeded. And I've denazified Mariupol, the Azov battalion. Go to hell, Nazis. Anyway, right? So he can proclaim his own victory. We can proclaim our own victory. That, Russian troops are out and they didn't destroy the sovereignty of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians can live in peace. And if the Europeans really mean their commitment to the Ukrainian people, stop painting everything yellow and blue, send them 100 billion euros and rebuild the bloody country. And you know what? Something else. How about wiping out the $97 billion of public debt that the Ukraine owns to the Western banks? If you really want to be solidaristic, do that. They are not doing any of that. My suspicion, it's a suspicion, I cannot prove it, history will tell, is that this is a solution President Zelensky really, really aches for. He really wants it. He's already mentioned 4 days ago that he no longer wants the Ukraine to be part of NATO. He has already mentioned that there can be an arrangement about Donbas and that Crimea can be discussed later. I said 1,000 years, he said later. My great fear is that when Putin is ready, following the very brave resistance of Ukrainians who've inflicted heavy losses on his army and so on, when he's ready to sign such an agreement, Washington, D.C. will torpedo it. Because the United States of America are great beneficiaries from this war, and there are elements, I'm not saying that everybody in Washington is like this, but there are elements, powerful elements within the military-industrial complex and the fracking oil and gas industry, especially in Texas and New Mexico, who are loving this.
They're called donors. Donors.
Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, announced that he's going to buy 100 billion euros worth of equipment from America. And similarly, and at the same time, they are already negotiating for LNG, liquefied natural gas, to be transported from Qatar and primarily Texas, fracked gas, to new terminals in Hamburg, where you are. Okay?
I'm always in shitty situations, yeah.
This is my fear. My fear is that, you see, and so they are the ones who are participating in this yellow and blue wonderful sea of support, of solidarity with Ukraine. But in the end, the powers that be behind supporting and creating the circumstances, as Ece put it very, very well, this resonance between people that are solidaristic with an invaded country and the powers that be, the media, the establishment. That those powers that be really do not have the interests of Ukrainians in their mind. And you can see that when I stood up in Greek Parliament and generally around Europe, and I advocated the Austria solution, a democratic, independent, but neutral, non-NATO country. I was immediately hounded. I had the former Prime Minister of Finland coming out and lambasting me for being Putin's useful idiot. To quote Brian, or misquote him, okay? Because I was talking about the neutral Ukraine. So these people are prepared to sacrifice the people of Ukraine on the altar of maintaining their theoretical right to be a member of NATO.
And the rest of us. Let's not forget the nuclear problem, because we should never, that should always be there, right in the front of our mind, because this is very, very dangerous brinkmanship.
And if I may add a second grave worry that I have, it's not a worry, I'm experiencing it. These wars imperialist wars, because this is a typical First World War type of imperialist war. Two imperialist sides clashing with, huge numbers of victims on both sides. They have a tradition of dividing the left. Remember how the Second International was destroyed by the Great War. The Social Democrats in Germany took the side of the German government, the nationalist government. Some Russians took the side of the Tsar. And we split between the Second and Third International. I don't think that the left ever recovered from that split between Social Democrats and Bolsheviks. We never recovered. And now we have something like that. I have been personally attacked. Noam Chomsky has been attacked. Naomi Klein has been attacked. I'm sure you will be attacked very soon, if you haven't already been, by left-wing comrades in Eastern Europe, in particular in Poland, for something called West-splaining. It's a form of mansplaining. That is, I've been accused of condescendingly telling Eastern Europeans what is in their interest. Now, that's a very big accusation, right? If it were true. I've been accused of denying them agency, of saying that, as Rogers has said, that it is in the interest of the West and of the East and of everybody to resolve this situation now with a neutral Ukraine solution. And, these comrades, former comrades, actually, they don't want to consider themselves to be my comrades. So that's why I would like them still to be my comrades, but they don't want to. So I'm not going to impose my comradeship upon them. They are saying that, you are denying us agency, and you are imposing upon us in the East your Western left-wing fixation with NATO and the Americans. We care only about being defended from Russia. Now, I understand that if you're Polish, you have a very long history of being fucked over by Russia, by Russian occupiers. Excuse my non-scientific language. And I can understand why we have different perspectives. I grew up in a fascist dictatorship sponsored by NATO. They grew up in a communist dictatorship sponsored by the Warsaw Pact. So, difference of opinion and perspectives and sensibilities are absolutely understandable. What is not understandable, I don't think, is to be told that, we Eastern Europeans know better about Eastern Europe. A majority wants us to be in NATO, in the Ukraine, in Poland. So who are you to tell us that we shouldn't be in NATO? Well, it's me. My name is Yanis, and I'm telling you that you're wrong. In the same way that when I speak to Greeks, if the Greeks, if somebody shows me an opinion poll that 70% of Greeks want to be in NATO, I don't give a damn. I will say that 70% of Greeks are wrong. And nobody's going to deny me the right to be critical of a majority that has been formed through a kind of propaganda process. That's why we're in the left. We're not going to stop being left-wing because the majority have been influenced by the right. Okay? And I'm not going to shut up about my views regarding Poland. I will not be condescending to my Polish or Ukrainian comrades. I am not going to pretend that I know better than them about what's good for them, but they are not going to say to me that I don't have the right to speak about, Poland being or Ukraine being in NATO. This is the basis of internationalism. And if we of the left forfeit the very principle of internationalism, that, when we speak about Burkina Faso or Nigeria or New Jersey or Greece, we all have an opinion because we are all citizens of the world. This is what we are as Europeans, as people of the world, as Africans, as Indians, as communists, as socialists, as, progressives. So I've said my piece.
Bravo.
Can I